there guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Aqua. Today we are going to be reading Chapter 9 of SOULTIDE. The only content warnings in this chapter are fantasy racism, a gun, fire and lava, drowning, injuries and blood, fantasy religion, threat of real death, and implied swearing. But anyways, with that out of the way, please enjoy Chapter 9 of SOULTIDE. The no good, terrible, very bad day. There was a sort of ironic comedy in Tango's plans for this hermitcraft season. He was a netherborn from a region of the nether that was known for being pockmarked with lava. Pink willow trees and rainbow blue reeds had flourished wherever the lava puddled, and the grand lava ocean bubbled up under the stranded floating islands. He had grown up attending sermons in the temple, where lava flowed behind glass walls, and reading the creation stories of the Lava Sisters. Outside virtual reality, his life had been framed by lava for so long. Now, Tango worked on covering an island with snow and ice, and he was pretty sure he still didn't have enough, despite all the full shulkers he was hauling around. His temperature-appropriate outfit added a fur-lined cloak, wool beanie, and traded his leather gloves for winter gloves for handling the snow. All the hard work was enough to warm him up the rest of the way. It at least wasn't as demeaning as a couple blankets wrapped around his shoulders, but he found himself seriously considering building a room where he could kick his feet up, light the fireplace, and drink hot chocolate while under a pile of blankets. But then again, in virtual reality, all the temperature perception was in his head. Somehow that made all the difference. Somehow it felt more realistic, more natural, to feel cold when he was laying snow and ice for decked-out foundation, and then when he was disconnected and awake on the Hermatrix ship. To think Tango used to hate the sight of ice. Maybe that was why he had decided Decked Out 2 required an ice theme. Because ice and dark grays were a terrifying combination. Decked Out had been scary for its players, and he knew just how to do that because he knew what was scary to himself. He was still thinking about whether to incorporate wardens into Decked Out. The issue there were that the warden was just a little too good at killing players, and it would be hard to have it coexist with Ravagers. He wasn't about to leave out the Ravagers from the game. Tango would get his fill of wrangling a warden tomorrow when he got back from Double Life. The plan was ready to go. He just needed the confirmation that the game was still on despite the glitch and Jimmy's agreement with the plan. He felt jittery just thinking about going down into the ancient city. Tango had seen Skulk once before, years ago, when he was a kid. He had just turned 13. "Why is it so cold?" Tango complained as soon as they stepped out of the swirling purple portal. "We won't be here for long, Tango." His mother put a hand on his back and pushed him along. Tango stumbled going down the stairs. It wasn't supposed to take long. She called over to his brother. "I don't want to see you teleporting, Impulse." Up ahead at the doors, Impulse glanced back with a sheepish smile. "Sorry, but I can't believe we're actually in the overworld, Mom. We get to see all the trees in real life, real snow, rivers, and oceans." Their mother sighed. "We're not in the right region for those things. Can't you already see all that in VR anyway?" "It's not the same," Impulse whined. Already shivering, Tango glared at his brother, who practically vibrated with energy. "It's freezing here. Aren't you cold?" "I think it's nice. Want my scarf?" Impulse started taking off his scarf before Tango had even accepted. The blue reed fabric didn't hold much warmth, but Tango gladly wrapped it around his neck and shoulders, hoping the extra layer would help. With how cold it was, they could have been atop a snowy mountain. However, when they walked outside, Tango thought they must have been on the lowest level of the world, because he found himself gawking at the buildings towering so high he couldn't see where they stopped. "Kids, don't wander off," their mother warned. Tango had to jog to keep up with her brisk walk. He didn't remember what else she said. He zoned out after that warning, taking it as just her being overly protective. Why couldn't he follow one simple rule? The overworld city was so fascinating to the two lava children boys who had just barely reached their teens. They had only seen the sun, sky, and clouds in virtual reality, and they relished in the little sprouts of green that poked out of the cracks in the stone. The brick that lined the streets was just as expected and from the overworld, but everything had so much more detail than a simple virtual reality server could contain. Age and time could be seen at every turn, and Tango wondered how long the city had stood here to earn all the wear and tear it had now. The people were sights to behold as well, overwhelmed with features and colors that contrasted so strikingly with the fire that touched so many of their neighbors in their home city, and the trending fashion seemed to be cloth masks. Some tones of all kinds mingled in the crowds, ears and tails varying, and Tango thought he might have even seen a pair of wings pass by. It was like walking through a new modded server that focused on aesthetics, only without the stuttering lag that always came with those servers. And most importantly, this was real. Impulse grabbed Tango's arm and pointed over to a storefront with a fading sign, only a few letters in Galactic able to be made out. "Mom, there's an end store. Can we go check it out?" She looked at where he was pointing, pausing in her tracks only for a moment. "No." Tango and Impulse shared a glance and grinned. They were going to see what was in that store, with or without their mother's permission. They just needed an opportunity. That chance came in the form of a crowded street. Tango nudged Impulse. When their mother wasn't looking their way, he flashed a bag of ender pearls at his brother, whose eyes widened as well as his grin. Not a few minutes later, he threw a pearl in an underhanded toss without breaking stride, pretending something else in another direction had caught his attention. The seconds spent waiting for the pearl to activate was full of impatient waiting to see if he would be caught or if the pearl had been a dud. Then, in a blink, Tango was in another spot on the street. He grinned, knowing Impulse would catch up. He threw another pearl further down the street, where they had come from, back towards the end store, and then ducked into an alleyway to hide from his mother while he waited for it to activate. He nearly slipped on the slick ground. When he appeared where the pearl had ended up, Tango looked around, trying to figure out which way to go for the end store. Ender pearls in the real world were more difficult to use than in virtual reality, where each pearl followed the exact same pattern. Out here, they were less reliable. He slowed down, realizing too many people were staring at him. He didn't know how to read those masked faces. Something was wrong. Endermen were nuisances in every dimension, Tango thought frantically, searching for Impulse, or even someone with obvious nether features. Ender pearls were a normal toy, right? The stares on him didn't seem to think so. Wide eyes flashed with emotions, maybe surprise, maybe fear. No matter which way he turned, people had stopped and were staring. He took a step, and the effect rippled in front of him, the crowd shuffling backwards, as if he was the new alien thing here. Then a man drew a gun. Tango bolted. People shouted and pulled each other out of the way. He threw a pearl in one direction, and then a second pearl in another. A gunshot made his ears ring. He knew he couldn't lead that to his family. Escape was on the top of his mind, and something was definitely wrong. He teleported and immediately slipped in a puddle. He threw his hands out to catch him and just barely avoided smashing his nose. He teleported again before he could catch his breath. The pearl had rolled into the gutters, and Tango found himself staring at a pipe sticking out of great stone brick walls. Again, his shoes found no purchase on the ground, slick and wet, and he grappled for a handhold in this new place. He grabbed a handful of what looked like tree roots and clay-like dirt. They broke free. With a fistful of useless roots, Tango fell. Falling, staring up at the walls that gave way to teetering pillars that held the whole city aloft, he realized he was seeing the city from the outside. The world, from this point of view, looked so foggy that all he knew was that the ground was far away. This fall would kill him. There would be no respawn. All he could think to do was throw another ender pearl, and prayed it would activate on solid ground before it was too late. Tango didn't want to see the world rushing towards him. He squeezed his eyes shut and waited for something to happen. And something did happen. Pain shocked through his body, and it took him a little too long to realize he wasn't falling anymore. There was just pain rippling through every part of his body, and an intense cold. Water filled his mouth. That got him moving. Tango scrambled to swim in the cloudy murk, and he gulped down, even as he broke the surface. He kicked towards the first hint of something jutting out of the water that he saw. He scrambled for any sort of salvation. He grabbed onto the trunk of a fallen tree and held onto it for dear life, coughing and gagging up foul water. Everything was cold. He hurt. He was probably half drowned and had no way to get back up to the city, but he was alive. And then the pearl activated. At first, Tango thought something had glitched and he was stuck waiting for the world to load in around him. However, this was the real world, and when he looked up, he saw a speck of light. The crack the pearl had rolled into and fallen down. When he moved, he felt stone and rocks around him. He felt helpless, but he knew he had to move if he didn't want to be zombie food. Biting back sounds of pain from his hurting hands, he dug in his pockets. A bag of ender pearls, wallet, loose gold coins, a snack, and a few acorns. He didn't have a good enough aim to throw an ender pearl through that tiny hole way up there, but the acorns were fresh enough that they still gave off plenty of light. Tango was suddenly glad he had picked them while waiting for his mother and Impulse at the temple that morning, because they lit up the cave as if he was holding a torch instead. A creeper hissed from somewhere, so Tango forced his legs to move, and he went in the opposite direction of the noise. He stepped over bones lying on the ground as he went deeper into the cave, praying that they wouldn't reform into skeletons. He didn't want to think about the clothes, swords, and axes covered in dust as he passed. Something made a clinking, purring sort of noise. Tango froze. He waved an acorn around, trying to catch sight of whatever it was, because he definitely wanted to avoid it. But only a cave of ice and smooth black tile was illuminated. Ice was one of the worst things for him to encounter down here, when he was already shivering and grinding his teeth to keep them from chattering. Close soaked through from that splash landing. What kept him moving was the hope of finding a pool of lava to warm up by, and the fear of being found by wandering monsters. Strangely enough, other than a few glimpses, he hadn't seen many mobs around here. Maybe virtual reality just overstated the monsters. Tango ended up crawling on the ice when he couldn't find a way around it, using the scarf as protection for his hands until it caught on a rock. His shoes were made for boiling hot temperatures, not for stable footing on underground ice. The cave changed as he kept going, quieter. A sort of dark white speckled mold grew over the ice and tile, and it stuck to his shoes when he walked on it. It stuck to the scrapes on his hands. It was cold. When he found lava, Tango nearly cried in joy. He climbed down as close as he could get without falling in, and then he just sat there, his shivering increasing, then slowing as his clothes dried and feeling returned to his hands. His stomach rolled and felt sour, but he kept himself from vomiting, if only to keep the noise from attracting monsters to his location. He should have listened to his mother. Had this been virtual reality, he could have contacted someone to help him out of this situation. He could have logged out, used admin commands to teleport himself out, or just gave up on that world. Tango didn't have a phone. He just had a pool of lava, some glow acorns, jerky snacks, ender pearls, and a black mold that seemed to creep closer and closer to him. Impulse's scarf had been useless. It probably wasn't worth retracing his steps to look for it. It wasn't like he was getting out of here. He blinked and rewound those thoughts. There was lava, which meant he had the main component for a portal. A second thought had him hanging his head again. He needed a bucket for that trick. The real overworld sucked. He wanted to go back home, back to the willow forest and floating city, back to the pods where they lived in a dimension of grass and ocean and endless possibilities, not stuck sitting by a lonely pool of lava surrounded by ice and mold and bones. Tango perked up, unless one of those bone piles had a bucket. Then promptly groaned. A bucket that wouldn't melt on contact with lava anyway. Regardless, it was probably the only plan he had at the moment. Sitting around and doing nothing felt infuriatingly useless. An acorn lighting the way, Tango left the warmth of the lava pool to look for old piles of corpses, bones, whatever. Maybe he'd find something flammable to light up the cave. He needed to check if the mold covering everything here was flammable. At the very least, no mobs seemed to hang around the stuff. It took a few tries and some grumbled swears before he successfully snapped his fingers. Then another few tries before he could hold the flicker of flame the action produced. He put the flame up to the black stuff coating his hand, begging for it to catch light and burn away. The fire snuffed out. Crap. Something in the dark responded with a grumbling of clicks, and that was Tango's cue to run. Icy mobs appeared from the shadows as he ran, blinking into existence in a flare of blue that were much colder than the blue glow of the nether acorns. He slid on grooves of ice, barely managed to catch his balance as he ran through a cave that was suddenly full of life. Crumbling walls slammed into his face every few seconds, forcing him to find turns in the dark before the chasing mob mauled him. Another spill of lava in the distance revealed that the cave was so much more expansive than he had realized, but he didn't run towards it. Not while he was being chased. He wasn't as fireproof as his blaze-born neighbors, so it wasn't like he could dive into it for protection. No matter where he ran, the thing followed. Other mobs fell away, but one kept chase, crunching into the dark mold and cracking the ice. If he stopped, he was dead. Tango dug his hands into the mold walls and started climbing. It turned out to be like climbing the wart that grew on crimson trees. But he didn't have time to think too much about that. He just had to keep moving and hope the monster couldn't climb. When he reached a flat ledge, he collapsed, and a flicker of a thought crossed his mind, glad that the ground was made of tile, not ice or mold. All other brain space was occupied by the cold creeping into his bones as soon as he stopped moving. He curled into a ball and shivered so hard it hurt. It was still so cold, Tango wanted to cry. He didn't want to die here. This was supposed to be his and Impulse's first venture into the overworld, just following their mom as she ran errands. They were supposed to meet their great aunt, who never came to the Nether anymore, and leave with gifts and overworld goodies after she spoiled them rotten. Tango and Impulse had made plans to go into virtual reality after the trip, to see what they could recreate in creative mode, but that wasn't going to happen because he was going to die here. That morning, he had been given coins to offer at the temple for good luck for their day. Instead, Tango had balanced on the fences around the old rubus trees outside the temple and picked acorns, keeping the coins for himself. The offering, if he had actually done it, was supposed to keep them safe. But that hadn't happened, and now he was going to die here. Tango bit down on his knuckle to keep the sobs from escaping his throat. He tasted copper and slime. The time for divine forgiveness was probably past, but he couldn't apologize for running through his mind, frantic with guilt and not giving Mother Nayeli her proper respect at the temple all of those sermon days. Or maybe those watchers the Andarians prayed to were real, and he should have been asking them for help. But then again, players from the overworld had more gods, like the stag god Aor. Everything was so confusing, and he just wanted to go home. Shivering, Tango managed to sit up. The monster hadn't been able to climb up after him, so he held out hope that it had wandered off. He cautiously peered over the edge, trying not to disturb the broken tile underneath him, and shined the acorn down onto the creature. It was still there, but now he could see it. All dark blue fur with a white shell on its chest, like a shield. The sight of Impulse's red scarf in its claws has made his breath hiccup. It had his scent. He could see the mouth, big and warbling, with white fangs that looked like his own. For a moment, he wondered if the things that were on its head were eye stalks. The acorn fell out of its hand. Tango grabbed at it and missed. The light bounced on the floor below. The thing turned its head to the acorn. It sniffed loudly, then reached out a furry arm to prod the acorn. It didn't look up at him. This was his chance while it was distracted. Tango should have run, but if he ran, he risked drawing its attention with the noise. It was probably half his size, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. He still had more acorns in his pocket. He also had more ender pearls. The pearls won out. He tossed one as far as he could, but his throw was lousy from all his shaking. The creature didn't seem to notice anyway, and that was what mattered. Tango ended up on another high point. And he was pretty sure anyway. When everything was dark and all he could really see was a lava pool to judge distance by, pulling out an acorn didn't help him get his bearings any better, but the light made him feel a little better. More dark gray rocks and crumbling tile, with a few splotches of mold here and there. There was something, however, that drew his attention to a stooped opening in the rocks, however. It sounded like a portal. And wasn't that a stroke of luck? Tango held the acorn in front of him and crouched to squeeze himself into the opening, curious and desperate for any scrape of hope. It was full of spiky rocks, cold and wet, which were all terrible things combined. After a few minutes, starting to think he was never going to be able to get out again, Tango saw it. Blue swirls was formed a transparent wall in the rocks, like a portal he could step through, but the color was all wrong. Trapped in this niche, it looked like a piece of a much larger portal that had been caught when the ceiling collapsed. He didn't see any obsidian instead, and the frame was made of more of that dark gray tile ridged and etched with motifs. He was too frazzled to even begin to understand. But he understood portals. A portal could take him somewhere else. Somewhere other than here. It probably wouldn't be to the Nether, but it wouldn't be this frozen hell. A chance at a better escape. Tango stepped into the portal and let it consume him. He just wanted to go home. Tango stumbled out onto white floors, the sunlight making it hard to see. His shoes, still wet, slipped onto the polished floor, and he crumbled into a heap at the base of a quartz pillar. Everything was so warm it hurt. Tango cried. The obsidian portal he had stumbled out of looked unchanged, full of purple swirls and thrumming with whispering notes, as it always did. It stood tall in its place at the wall of the temple, the same portal he had walked through with his mother and Impulse that morning. It connected to the portal in the deep as well, apparently. The temple's ceiling vaulted high above Tango, full of whites and golds, bright with willow crystals, and lava murmured behind thick glass. Mother Naeli and Mother Saphia smiled at him from stained quartz windows. Home. He was home. It was so warm. Tango, his clothes soaked, covered in dirt, blood, and mold, sat there and cried. The temple clerics found him like that.